The world was on fire. For centuries, humanity had thrived unaware of the darkness lurking in the vastness of space. But now, in the early 22nd ND century, a cataclysmic event shattered all illusions of safety. The first invasion came without warning. The skies darkened as ships the size of continents descended, their hulking forms blotting out the sun. They arrived like locusts, devouring everything in their path. Cities burned, civilizations crumbled, and the very earth itself trembled under the weight of their assault. The invaders, known only as the Krelk, were merciless. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever known, and their goal was clear: the total annihilation of the human race. They sought to conquer Earth, strip its resources, and wipe its inhabitants from existence. What followed was an age of despair, where humanity fought with every ounce of strength, only to be pushed back at every turn. But humans, driven by an indomitable will to survive, refused to give up. In the ashes of this apocalyptic world, a group of survivors emerged, a ragtag coalition of elite soldiers, brilliant scientists, and everyday civilians who had not only managed to survive the initial onslaught but had begun to fight back. They were united by one goal: to reclaim their planet and rebuild what had been lost. At the heart of the resistance were the survivors of the 13th Strike Force, a group of soldiers who had been trained for the worst, but never imagined they'd face an invasion of this magnitude. Captain Maria Hayes, a hardened veteran of countless battles, led them. Her eyes were tired, but they burned with the same fire they had when she first enlisted. Beside her was Dr. Evelyn Miller, a scientist who had spent decades studying alien technology, desperately trying to reverse engineer the weapons used against them. And then there were the civilians, engineers, hackers, and ordinary men and women who had been thrust into extraordinary circumstances, fighting to protect their homes, their families, and their future. It was in the remains of what had once been New York City that they first made contact with the Krelk. The resistance had been tracking their movements for weeks, gathering intel, hoping to find a weakness, a crack in the armor. And then it came an opportunity too valuable to ignore. The Krelk had deployed a massive ground unit to secure a key energy facility in the ruins of the city. It was there that the resistance would strike. The plan was simple: ambush the invaders, cripple their supply lines, and give humanity a glimmer of hope. As the team approached the facility, tension hung in the air like a storm. The buildings around them were nothing but hollow shells, remnants of a civilization long gone. They moved in silence, each soldier knowing that their next step could be their last. They had no illusions about the odds. They were outgunned, outmanned, and outclassed in every way. But they had something the Krelk did not: the will to fight, the strength to survive. Captain Hayes signaled to her team, and they took their positions, ready for the assault. The Krelk soldiers, towering over 8 feet tall with sinewy black exoskeletons, were a terrifying sight to behold. Their weapons crackled with energy, and their movements were fluid, calculated, and lethal. They were the perfect killing machine, something humanity had never encountered before. Then, the first shot rang out. The resistance struck with everything they had, overwhelming the Krelk's perimeter in a blur of gunfire and explosions. The Krelk retaliated with devastating force, but the resistance fought with the ferocity of animals cornered. They knew this was their only chance. If they failed, humanity's last hope would be extinguished forever. The battle raged for hours, a brutal, unforgiving war of attrition. Soldiers fell, their blood staining the cracked earth. Explosions shook the ground beneath their feet. The Krelk fought with cold precision, but the resistance refused to break. Captain Hayes was in the thick of it, coordinating the assault, barking orders over the chaos. She had seen countless battles, but none like this. It was as if the very soul of humanity was being tested. She glanced over at Dr. Miller, who was scrambling to hack into the Krelk's communications network, trying to disrupt their coordination. The civilians, armed with makeshift weapons and crude technology, fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. For a moment, it seemed as if they might actually win. The Krelk forces, disoriented and shaken by the resistance's tenacity, began to retreat. The tide of battle seemed to turn in their favor. But just as the first glimmer of victory appeared on the horizon, something far worse emerged. From the shadows of the ruined city, a new force appeared. It was not the Krelk they had been fighting, no, these were something else entirely. The new invaders were darker, more sinister. Their ships were sleek, black, and almost insect-like in design, gliding silently through the smoke-filled sky. Their soldiers, unlike the Krelk, were smaller, but their weapons were far more advanced, capable of disintegrating anything in their path. This new force had come to finish what the Krelk had started, and the resistance was completely unprepared. As the Krelk fell back, the new invaders unleashed a weapon that shattered the very ground beneath their feet. A massive wave of energy surged outward, tearing through the resistance's ranks like paper. Soldiers screamed in agony as they were disintegrated in an instant. The remaining resistance fighters tried to regroup, but it was too late. Captain Hayes watched in horror as the new invaders advanced, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. There was no hope now. They had fought for so long, only to be undone by an even greater force. She had led her people into the heart of battle, but now it seemed as though everything had been for nothing. "Fall back!" She screamed into the comms. "Everyone, fall back! We need to regroup now." But it was too late. The new invaders closed in, their weapons ready to finish the job. And then, just as it seemed like all was lost, a bright flash of light erupted from the heart of the energy facility. It wasn't just an explosion, it was something else, something that no one could have predicted. The ground shook violently as an enormous energy pulse radiated outward, throwing everything into chaos. When the dust finally settled, nothing was left of the battlefield but a vast, smoking crater. The resistance had vanished. The Krelk had been driven back, but the new invaders remained, their presence more terrifying than ever. And as the last remnants of humanity looked up to the sky, they realized the truth: this was only the beginning. The dust from the explosion had barely settled when Captain Maria Hayes finally allowed herself to breathe. She hadn't realized how tense her body had been, locked in the constant adrenaline of battle, until now. The aftermath of the devastating pulse left her with a hollow feeling. Her team had been decimated. The city around her, once a proud symbol of humanity's dominance, was nothing more than a lifeless husk. And as she looked over the barren wasteland, she realized that the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning, and the real battle had yet to unfold. "Captain, you're still with us, right?" Dr. Evelyn Miller's voice came through the comms, pulling Maria back to reality. "We need to regroup. We're not done yet." Maria's grip tightened on the assault rifle she was still holding, though the weapon now felt heavier than it ever had. Her fingers twitched involuntarily, the weight of leadership settling back into her chest. The words she'd spoken earlier to her team were no longer just orders, they were her own call to action. "I'm here, Dr. Miller. Where are you? We need to find the others." The comms crackled, the static barely masking the sense of urgency in Evelyn's voice. "I'm with the civilians. They're injured, Captain. They need help. We can't let them fall behind." Maria glanced at the others around her. A few familiar faces, soldiers and scientists alike, were still moving, their bodies battered but determined. They weren't the only ones left, there were others, too, survivors from various units and independent fighters who had banded together, each with a single, unified goal: survival. But Maria couldn't help the sinking feeling in her stomach as she thought of her fallen comrades. They had been so close, yet so far from winning. The truth of the situation was clear. The Krelk were retreating, but only temporarily. They hadn't lost, not by a long shot. This new enemy had turned the tide, and the resistance was left scrambling to figure out how to deal with the unimaginable power they'd just faced. That energy pulse, the one that had wiped out their forces, was beyond anything they had ever seen. It didn't belong to the Krelk. No, these new invaders were something much darker, much more terrifying. Maria gritted her teeth. "Get the civilians to safety. I'm going after the Krelk. We're not giving up that easy." A low growl of frustration rumbled in her throat as she adjusted the straps on her combat gear. The first wave of the invasion had cost humanity everything they'd held dear. And now, in this new, warped reality, every minute that passed was a minute closer to extinction. They didn't have the luxury of being careful anymore. The humans needed to strike hard before the invaders figured out their next move. Roger that, Evelyn responded, though the tension in her voice was evident. But don't do anything reckless, Maria. We can't afford to lose you now. With a single, curt nod, Maria disconnected from the comms and moved out, her team following close behind. The terrain was unfamiliar. The landscape, once teeming with life, had been turned into a dystopian wasteland. The skies were shrouded in darkness, polluted by the remnants of alien weaponry. The earth beneath them groaned as if in pain, reflecting the battle scars of a world pushed to its limits. As they approached the Krelk encampment, Maria's heart pounded in her chest. The Krelk's retreat wasn't an act of surrender, it was strategic. They were regrouping, preparing for something far worse than what they had just endured. Maria had no illusions about the stakes now. The resistance had to hit them hard and fast. If they allowed the Krelk time to recalibrate, there would be no second chance. On me, Maria whispered, as her team took their positions. They'd be engaging the Krelk in the shadow of their own high-tech fortifications, hoping that the element of surprise would be enough to gain the upper hand. The first shot came from nowhere, a brilliant flash of green plasma streaking through the air. The ground beneath them erupted into a shower of dirt and debris, and they dove for cover, instinctively scrambling for safety. "Contact!" shouted Lieutenant Eric Kane, one of the few remaining soldiers from their strike force. His voice was steady, his training kicking in despite the chaos around them. "Multiple hostiles closing in." Maria didn't hesitate. The seconds stretched out before her like hours, but she knew they couldn't afford to waste any time. She raised her weapon, her eyes narrowing as she took aim at the nearest Krelk. The alien's armored figure towered above her, but she didn't flinch. A single shot rang out, hitting the Krelk square in the chest. The creature staggered, but didn't fall, its armor had absorbed the impact. "Damn it," Maria cursed, ducking back behind cover. "We need to hit them harder. Eric, cover me." Eric didn't hesitate. He unleashed a hail of gunfire toward the Krelk, buying Maria the time she needed to close the distance. She activated the pulse grenade at her waist, a weapon that had been scavenged from an old Krelk supply drop. With a quick flick of her wrist, she tossed it toward the enemy. It detonated with a deafening blast, sending shockwaves through the Krelk ranks. They didn't fall. But they hesitated. In that brief moment of confusion, the humans pushed forward. The Krelk were formidable, yes, but they weren't invincible. The humans had learned. They had adapted, scavenging alien technology for weapons, armor, and tactics. Each engagement was a brutal learning process, but it was enough to give them an edge. Slowly, methodically, the humans started to gain ground. Evelyn's voice crackled over the comms again. "Captain, we've got a situation. We're seeing strange energy readings. These aren't Krelk tech signatures. They're something else." "Not now, Dr. Miller," Maria barked, reloading as she ducked behind a shattered wall. "We're in the middle of a fight here. Can't you see?" "I'm telling you, Maria, you need to hear me out. This is bad, this is beyond bad. Whatever's happening here, it's not just Krelk. It's bigger." A sick feeling spread in Maria's gut. She knew something wasn't right. This new enemy, the one that had emerged with that devastating pulse, was too much to ignore. "What do you mean bigger?" Before Evelyn could respond, the Krelk forces seemed to regroup. Their leader, a towering, armored alien, a hulking beast with crimson eyes, stared down at Maria and her team from the top of a nearby structure. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The look in its eyes was one of pure hatred, the same look it had given when it had first set foot on Earth. Then, there was a flash of light, so bright that it seared the ground. The sky above them cracked open, and a massive ship descended, its sleek form darkening the atmosphere as it blocked out what little sun remained. The ground shook violently. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to be told it was the new invaders. They were back. But this time, they weren't just watching. They were coming for them. The comms went silent. No one could hear anything over the noise, the shockwaves that rattled everything in their path. And as the enemy closed in, one thing was certain: this fight was far from over. But deep in Maria's gut, something twisted, a realization she couldn't yet put into words. They were out of their depth. Something had shifted. The true power of their enemies had just begun to reveal itself. And something told her that the Resistance's greatest challenge wasn't the Krelk, nor the new invaders, it was the darkness growing inside their own ranks. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, blood, and something far darker, something alien. The battle had taken a turn that none of them could have expected, and Maria felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders like a burden too great to bear. Every decision felt heavier now, every step a reminder that they were fighting not just for survival, but for the very soul of humanity itself. The Krelk had retreated, but they were not the ones Maria feared. It was the new invaders, their sudden appearance, their overwhelming power that haunted her thoughts. In the chaos of the last assault, there had been moments of brilliance. Eric had held the line when they were surrounded, his unwavering resolve keeping the Krelk at bay long enough for the rest of the squad to regroup. Evelyn, despite the weight of her own doubts, had uncovered the first glimmers of truth about the alien technology they'd scavenged. In her lab, tucked away beneath the remnants of a ruined skyscraper, she worked tirelessly, trying to make sense of what the Resistance had found. But even she wasn't sure how much of it could truly be trusted. The new invaders seemed to have their own form of technology, different from anything they had encountered before, and it was proving to be beyond even Evelyn's vast intellect. Yet despite the growing uncertainty, the human spirit remained unbroken. There were moments of triumph, however small. A civilian engineer, who had once been a mere bystander in the war, now held the key to a new, devastating weapon, a plasma cannon designed from the wreckage of a Krelk cruiser. It was crude, far from perfect, but it was effective enough to give the humans a fighting chance. These improvised weapons, born from the remnants of their fallen cities and the ruins of alien warships, were their only hope now. Still, the Resistance could not escape the feeling that they were fighting against an enemy that knew them too well. The invaders had been waiting for them, anticipating every move, every strategy. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they had been played from the start, manipulated into this war by forces far beyond anything they could comprehend. It was Evelyn's research that first brought them closer to the truth. Late one night, when the camp had fallen into a temporary lull, Evelyn came to Maria, her face pale with the kind of exhaustion that only sleepless nights could bring. "I've been digging through the Krelk data logs," she said quietly, pulling up a holographic display on a small portable device. "And I found something strange. These invaders, whoever they are, they've been manipulating the Krelk. They've been using them as pawns, not just in this invasion, but for millennia." Maria's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Evelyn gestured to the data. The Krelk weren't just sent to conquer Earth. They were sent to prepare it for something else. These invaders, they've been controlling them from behind the scenes. They've engineered entire wars on other planets, using the Krelk as their weapons. This invasion? It's just part of a much larger scheme. And we're in the middle of it. The weight of the word settled in Maria's gut like a rock. They weren't fighting for survival alone, they were fighting to keep their planet from becoming just another pawn in a galactic game. But who was the real enemy? The Krelk, the invaders who had shown up out of nowhere, or something far more insidious lurking in the shadows? As Evelyn's words sank in, Maria looked around at her team. Eric, standing at the edge of the camp, scanning the horizon as he always did, his eyes narrowed in concentration. His stoic demeanor had been a source of strength for the team, but Maria had begun to see cracks in his resolve. He was a warrior through and through, but the horrors they had faced were starting to eat away at him, his doubts bubbling just beneath the surface. The war was taking a toll on everyone mentally, physically, emotionally. "Captain," Eric's voice cut through her thoughts. "The Krelk are regrouping." We've been seeing new troop movements just beyond the border of our camp. I don't think they're retreating anymore. Maria turned to him, steeling herself against the weight of the reality that was unfolding before them. Get the team ready. We're not backing down. Not now. But even as she gave the orders, a gnawing fear took root in her chest. The invaders hadn't given up. In fact, they were growing bolder, more relentless. The human resistance was far from ready for the full force of what was coming. In the heart of their command center, Evelyn pored over the latest data from the Krelk's technology. I've cracked part of their communications network, she said, her voice filled with the sharp edge of determination. It's more than just a transmission relay. It's a blueprint for an entire infrastructure, something massive, hidden beneath the surface of the planet. This isn't just a war. It's a countdown. A countdown? Maria asked, her heart skipping a beat. Evelyn nodded grimly. They've been preparing Earth for something far worse than we've seen. If we don't stop them soon, whatever they've been building down there will be activated. The implications were staggering. What could the invaders have been planning? What could be more devastating than the war they had already unleashed? But Maria had no time to ponder it. The Resistance's next move would have to come fast. The game had changed again. At that moment, a signal came in from one of the forward scouts, a report of strange movements deep within the enemy lines. There was something different this time, something out of place. Maria and Eric led a small strike team to investigate, hoping to find a clue that might unravel the mystery of the invaders' true intentions. They navigated through the ruins, their eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The silence was unnerving. Then, as they rounded a corner, they came face to face with what they were looking for, a massive structure, buried deep beneath the surface of a forgotten city. Its purpose was unclear, but the sheer scale of it was enough to send a chill down their spines. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, a structure of alien origin, pulsating with energy and seemingly alive. Maria reached for her comms. Evelyn, you need to see this. We've found something. But before Evelyn could respond, the ground shook beneath them, and a piercing roar echoed in the distance. It was the Krelk rallying for one final push. But this time, there was something else with them. The new invaders. The ones who had watched from the shadows, their true power still hidden. And in that moment, as the sky above them darkened and the ground beneath their feet trembled, Maria realized that this was no longer just a fight for survival. This was a battle for the future of the entire galaxy. The Krelk were pawns, but who were the real players in this game? And more importantly, could they stop it before it was too late? Just as the tension reached its peak, a new signal appeared on their radar, an unknown ship, streaking across the sky at impossible speeds. It was unlike any craft they had seen before, its design sleek and elegant, but undeniably human. A new ally? Or a trap? Only time would tell. The Resistance had been given a brief glimmer of hope, but even that felt uncertain in a war that was quickly spiraling beyond their control. The next battle would decide everything, and as Maria stared into the distance, she knew they had only one option left, to strike first, before the true enemy could make its move. But that was easier said than done. And as the invaders closed in, the final pieces of the puzzle began to shift, hinting at a far darker secret, one that could unravel everything. The world seemed to hold its breath as the human Resistance prepared for the final stand. Maria could feel it in the air, the electric tension, the palpable weight of the moment. The invaders had shown no mercy, no hesitation in their relentless assault. With each passing hour, their hold on Earth tightened, and the truth that had begun to unfold only made things worse. They weren't just fighting for their planet, they were fighting against an overwhelming force, one that seemed to be always one step ahead. But this time, there was no retreat, no more running. It was time to strike back, or die trying. Maria stood before her team, her eyes scanning the faces of those who remained. There were fewer now than before, the war taking its toll in ways she had never imagined. Eric was by her side, his usual stoic demeanor cracking under the weight of everything they had lost. His eyes betrayed his doubt, but there was something else in them, too, a fire, a determination that had always defined him. It was the same look she saw in the others, the last spark of hope that refused to die. "We've got one shot at this," Maria said, her voice low but firm. "We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we hit them now. The command center is the key. If we can take it down, we'll cripple their ability to coordinate. But this isn't going to be easy. We don't know what kind of defenses they have, or how deep the enemy goes. So we'll have to improvise. It's our only chance." The team nodded, their faces set in grim resolve. They had already made peace with the idea of dying in battle. Each of them knew the risks, but they also knew that if they didn't act now, all would be lost. The invaders' command center, hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient city, was their last hope. Evelyn, her face pale and drawn from exhaustion, was the first to speak. "I've mapped out the facility," she said, projecting a hologram of the layout. "There are multiple layers of security energy shields, automated defense drones, and a vast network of traps. But we've found a weak point. There's a small entrance in the lower levels, one that should be unguarded. If we can get through that, we can take out the power grid and shut down their entire operation." Maria studied the map, her mind racing. Every second felt like a lifetime. The enemy was closing in, and the longer they waited, the less chance they had of succeeding. "All right. We go in fast, we go in hard, and we don't stop until we've taken it down. Eric, you lead the charge. Keep your team tight. We'll cover your back." Eric gave her a sharp nod, the weight of the responsibility clear on his shoulders. "Understood." The plan was set. There would be no turning back once they moved out. As the final preparations were made, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She felt it deep in her bones, a gnawing sensation that they were being led into a trap. But there was no time to dwell on it. Every instinct screamed at her to act. They had no other option. The first steps into the ruins were like walking through a ghost town. Once a bustling metropolis, it was now nothing more than a skeletal remains of a civilization long gone. The streets were littered with the remnants of the previous battles, abandoned vehicles, craters from enemy fire, and the distant echoes of the war. The silence was deafening. "Move out," Maria commanded. "Stay sharp. We don't know what's waiting for us down there." They made their way through the wreckage, the hum of energy shields from the invaders' base growing louder with each step. The entrance Evelyn had identified was in sight now, a small, unassuming doorway hidden in the shadows of a collapsed building. The closer they got, the more the hairs on the back of Maria's neck stood on end. This was it. The moment they'd all been waiting for. The moment that would decide their fate. Eric signaled for the team to halt. He crouched low, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "We're in position. Get ready." The door was locked, but not for long. Maria stepped forward, her weapon raised, and with a single motion, Eric used the plasma cutter they'd salvaged from a Krelk wreck to slice through the barrier. It fell away, revealing the dark, cold depths of the command center below. As they descended, the darkness enveloped them, the sound of their footsteps echoing ominously in the cavernous space. There was something unnatural about it, something that made Maria's stomach churn. The walls were covered in alien symbols, glowing faintly with an eerie, pulsating light. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that she couldn't explain. They reached the bottom level in what felt like an eternity. The power grid was located just beyond the next doorway, but Maria could already sense the presence of something else. Something waiting. She held up her hand, signaling the team to halt once again. "What's wrong?" Eric whispered. "I don't know," Maria replied, her voice tight. "I feel like we're being watched." The tension in the air was suffocating. Every moment stretched on, but nothing moved. Nothing happened. Then, without warning, the walls erupted with energy blasts, the corridor lighting up in flashes of bright white light. Drones appeared from nowhere, their sleek metallic bodies hovering silently before unleashing a barrage of fire upon them. The team scattered, diving for cover as the air was filled with the deafening roar of laser fire and explosions. "We've been compromised," Eric shouted, returning fire as the drones advanced. "Fall back to the entrance." Maria's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. They had been betrayed. The invaders had anticipated every move they made. But there was no time to dwell on the feeling of dread that was clawing at her. They had come too far. Every second counted. They had to push through, or it would all be for nothing. The drones moved with unnatural precision, their advanced technology making them nearly impossible to target. Maria fired round after round, her shots ricocheting off the drone's armor, but it did little to slow them down. One by one, the resistant soldiers were forced back, retreating further into the depths of the command center. Maria's mind raced, trying to process the impossible reality unfolding before her. They had known about the invaders, had fought them, bled against them, tried to outsmart them. But this? This was something entirely different. The invaders weren't the masterminds of this invasion. They were pawns in a far darker scheme. The invader leader looked up at the creature and then turned to Maria, his voice now strangely detached. "We were fools," he said, his tone carrying an air of resignation. This was never our war to win." Maria's pulse quickened as she realized that the invaders had been running from this thing just as much as humanity had been. They were not here to conquer Earth, they were here to prepare it, to draw humanity into this final conflict, to unleash the horrors of this ancient being back into the galaxy. They had been part of a much larger scheme, and now it was all coming to a head. The creature's massive, glowing eyes locked onto Maria, and for a moment, everything went silent. The ground shook once more, and with a deafening roar, the being released an energy wave so powerful that it sent both the humans and the invaders flying backward, crashing into the ruins of the city. The shockwave knocked the wind out of Maria, and she struggled to rise to her feet, the world spinning around her. In that moment, as the dust and debris settled, she could hear Evelyn's voice, now faint but still clear, over the comms. "It's drawing power from the planet itself. It's trying to awaken something buried in the core of Earth. If it succeeds..." Maria's mind raced as the implications of Evelyn's words settled in. This creature wasn't just another weapon. It wasn't just another enemy. It was the key to a catastrophe beyond anything they had prepared for. "Shut it down," Maria gasped, her voice hoarse. "We have to stop it, now." But even as she spoke, a new wave of terror washed over her. The creature wasn't the only danger. Behind it, more lights began to flicker to life. From the depths of the Earth, massive structures, ancient, alien, and horrifying, began to rise, tearing through the surface like tendrils of some monstrous plant, spreading across the landscape. The true scale of the threat was becoming painfully clear. This wasn't just an alien invasion anymore. This was the beginning of an extinction-level event, one that had been planned long before humanity ever knew it was in danger. As the resistance regrouped, bloodied and battered, they knew that this wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for the very future of their species, a fight to stop an ancient, godlike entity from waking and unleashing its power upon the galaxy. But as Maria looked at her team, something gnawed at her, a gut-wrenching feeling that perhaps even they weren't enough to stop this horror. They had reached the precipice, but the abyss before them was far deeper, far darker than any of them had imagined. And in the distance, the creature's massive, glowing eyes fixed upon them, as if it were watching, waiting for the moment when the last piece of the puzzle would fall into place. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. And the next move would decide everything. The ground beneath Maria cracked open again, and the air was thick with the hum of alien energy. The creature, an ancient behemoth, its eyes blazing with the fury of an untold age, loomed over them, its massive form casting an overwhelming shadow. The tendrils rising from the earth were now all around them, pulsing with an eerie, unnatural energy. This wasn't just a war anymore. This was an extinction event in motion, and humanity was staring it in the face. Maria's mind raced as she scanned the battlefield. The resistance, battered and bruised, had barely regrouped. Eric, the unflappable soldier, was struggling to rise to his feet, his arm bleeding heavily from a gash caused by the energy blast. Evelyn, hunched over, was desperately trying to calculate the creature's weak points, her fingers flying over the map, but it was hard to focus with the constant tremors and the oppressive weight of the creature's presence. The invaders, the very enemies who had terrorized Earth for years, were now cowering in the shadows, too afraid to act. This was humanity's fight, and it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the future of the entire galaxy. Maria felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders like a crushing stone. Every decision, every move, could tip the scales one way or the other. She could feel the pulse of the enemy's power deep in her bones. If they didn't act fast, the world as they knew it would be lost. The creature, still standing in the center of the chaos, let out a bone-chilling roar that sent shockwaves through the air. Its eyes locked on the resistance, and for a moment, Maria felt her heart freeze. It wasn't fear, it was something worse. It was the realization that they might not be able to win this. Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. Maria, I found something, an energy source deep beneath the creature. If we can sever its connection to whatever's feeding it, we might have a chance. Maria turned, her pulse quickening. How? How do we do that? Evelyn's hand shook as she pointed to a glowing seam in the earth. There. That's where it's drawing power from. We have to get down there, disrupt the flow, and take out the source. If we can sever the connection, the creature will lose its power. Maria's breath caught. It was a slim chance, but it was all they had. Eric, gather the team. We move in 5 minutes. Eric nodded, his face set in determination. Understood. But before they could move, the invader leader stepped forward. His eyes glinted with desperation. You're running out of time. That thing. It's not just feeding off your world. It's feeding off something older, something darker. If you sever its connection, the entire planet will burn. You won't win this. Maria's gaze narrowed. You're lying. The invader leader shook his head, his voice grim. I've seen it. I've felt it. The creature you're facing isn't just a weapon, it's a catalyst. If you stop it, the planet will implode. The energy will collapse in on itself. It's designed that way. Maria's chest tightened as the implications hit her. They were being forced to make an impossible choice: stop the creature and risk destroying everything. Or let it continue to feed and let it destroy everything in its wake. There was no good choice here, only the lesser of two evils. We don't have a choice, Maria muttered to herself, before turning to her team. We stop it. We go for the power source. Prepare yourselves for anything. With the stakes higher than ever, the resistance charged forward, making their way toward the glowing seam in the earth. The creature's presence was suffocating, and every step felt like they were wading through molasses. But they pressed on, driven by the one thing the invaders couldn't take from them: hope. As they reached the power source, a terrifying roar echoed behind them. The creature, sensing their approach, began to react, its immense form thrashing as it tried to reach them. The tendrils grew stronger, reaching for the team, their glowing tips crackling with energy. Eric was the first to move, charging forward and firing his plasma weapon into the tendrils, buying them a few precious moments. Evelyn, working with frantic urgency, hacked into the alien system, her fingers flying across the interface. It's locked. I need another minute. Maria could feel the creature's eyes on them, burning with malice. She could feel its hunger, its ancient rage. Time was running out. Get it done! Maria shouted, her voice hoarse as she grabbed a heavy device from the ground, preparing to fend off any new threats. The ground shook violently again as the creature attempted to rise, its form pressing further into the earth, causing the whole area to buckle and crack. The invaders, still lingering in the shadows, looked on, helpless and frightened. They knew the battle was lost. Suddenly, just as Evelyn hit the final key, the ground beneath them collapsed. The power source erupted in a blinding flash of light, and Maria's vision went white as a wave of energy surged through the air. The ground cracked open in an explosion of debris, and everything was thrown into chaos. When Maria came to, the world was still spinning. The energy was gone, the air heavy with the remnants of the explosion. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the dust, and saw it, the creature, its massive form now crumpled and lifeless on the ground. The tendrils that had once risen from the earth were now inert, withering as the power faded from them. The ancient being was dead. But as she tried to push herself up, something caught her eye, something that sent a cold shiver down her spine. From the depths of the crater where the power source had been, something else began to emerge. It wasn't the creature, it was something smaller, but no less terrifying. A humanoid figure, standing tall amidst the debris, its skin pale, its eyes glowing a sickly green. Its features were eerily familiar, too familiar. Maria's breath caught as the figure stepped forward. It was human. But not in any way she could have expected. Surprised? The figure said, its voice a chilling whisper. Did you really think you were the ones who woke it up? The twist hit like a hammer, the weight of it crushing her chest. She had thought the invaders were the true threat. She had thought the ancient creature was the enemy. But in the end, it was someone or something else entirely pulling the strings. The power to destroy them had never been in the hands of the invaders. It had always been theirs. And now, it was too late to stop it. As the figure's glowing eyes fixed on her, Maria realized the truth: they had just become pawns in a much larger, much darker game. Maria's body stiffened as she stared at the figure emerging from the crater. It moved with eerie precision, each step calculated and deliberate, its eyes glowing an unnatural shade of green. For a moment, her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. This wasn't a simple alien soldier or an ancient being of unspeakable power. No, this was human, yet not human in the way she had ever understood. The figure's pale skin gleamed faintly under the harsh light of the explosions that still rippled through the air, and the more Maria focused, the more it became clear, this wasn't just a human who had survived. This was someone or something who had been part of something far greater, far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. You think you've won, don't you? The figure said, its voice eerily calm, devoid of emotion. You think you've saved your world, your people. Maria's breath caught as she felt the weight of its words sink in. This was the ultimate twist, the culmination of everything they had fought against. The creature, the invaders, the entire war, it had all been a distraction, a carefully orchestrated ruse. The true force behind the invasion wasn't the alien armies, it was this entity. This figure. What are you? Maria demanded, her voice raw with both disbelief and anger. Who are you? The figure smiled a smile that sent chills down her spine. I'm something you wouldn't understand. I'm the one who has always been in control. The one who orchestrated everything from the shadows. The realization hit Maria like a thunderbolt. This wasn't just a pawn. This wasn't some hidden leader of the invaders. No, this was someone or something who had been manipulating them all along. The invaders weren't the true masterminds, they were part of the plan just as much as the humans had been. The war, the destruction, the suffering, it had all been engineered to bring about this very moment. You're the reason they came, Maria said, her voice trembling with the weight of the truth. You're the one who woke the creature. You knew what would happen. The figure nodded, almost with amusement. Indeed. The creature was never meant to be controlled. It was always meant to be a catalyst. I needed it, just as much as I needed the invaders. I needed the war, the chaos, to awaken the next phase of the plan. Maria's mind raced, her thoughts swirling in confusion and disbelief. And now what? What happens now? The figure tilted its head, as though pondering the question. Now, the real game begins. You see, humanity's true purpose has always been to serve as the bridge. You are the key to something far larger than your world, than this galaxy. And now, the time has come for you to realize your place in the universe. Before Maria could respond, the ground beneath them rumbled once more, and the figure's form flickered like a hologram, fading in and out. Then, with a final, chilling glance, it vanished into the ether, leaving Maria and her team standing in stunned silence. In the wake of the battlefield was eerily still. The once towering creature, now reduced to a lifeless husk, lay sprawled across the ruins of the city. The invaders, what few remained, had retreated, their initial fear of the ancient being now overtaken by their desperation to escape the unknown entity that had just revealed itself. And the humans? They were left to grapple with the terrifying truth they had uncovered. Maria stood at the edge of the crater, staring into the distance. The dust from the explosion still lingered in the air, and the silence was suffocating. But even as the weight of the situation pressed down on her, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of something else, something powerful. It was the feeling of survival, of resilience. The war had taken everything from them. It had taken their families, their homes, their futures. But in the end, it hadn't broken them. They were still standing, still fighting, and that was something that would never be taken from them. Eric's voice broke through her thoughts. "Maria, we did it. We stopped the creature. We won." Maria turned to him, her expression hardening. "We stopped one threat. But the war? It's far from over." Evelyn, still shaken from the chaos of the final battle, nodded. "The creature may be dead, but we've learned that the true enemy was never the invaders. It was something far greater. We need to understand what we're really up against." Maria turned to look at her team, each one of them battered and exhausted, but also resolute. Despite everything, they had endured. And that endurance, that refusal to give in, was what made them human. It was the heart of their species, the thing that no alien force, no matter how powerful, could ever truly extinguish. "Humanity's resilience isn't something that can be easily erased," Maria said, her voice steady. "We've been pushed to the brink. But we'll keep fighting. We'll keep adapting. And whatever this new threat is, we'll face it together." As the team began to regroup, the weight of their victory, if it could even be called that, settled over them. They had a long road ahead, filled with more uncertainty, more challenges, but also more hope. They knew the true nature of their enemy now, and that knowledge would guide them. It wasn't just about surviving the invasion anymore. It was about finding their place in a universe that was far more complex and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The war had revealed humanity's strength, its ingenuity, and its potential. In the face of overwhelming odds, they had fought back. And in the end, that's what mattered. They had shown the universe that humanity was not something to be underestimated. They had earned their place in the cosmos, not through brute force, but through their resilience, their adaptability, and their unwavering belief that they could overcome anything. But as Maria gazed up at the stars, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The true test was yet to come. Whatever was coming next, whatever threat awaited them, it would be their greatest challenge yet. And so, as they stood on the precipice of the unknown, humanity's future was uncertain. But one thing was clear: they would face it with the same courage, determination, and hope that had carried them through the darkest days of their history. Because, in the end, that was the essence of humanity. No matter how many times they were knocked down, they always got back up. The universe was vast, and humanity was small in comparison. But it wasn't about size. It was about heart. And that was something no alien force, no ancient being could ever take away.